Hey, it's Brock here with Rock Hill Farm, and today we're going to build a kitchen table for my daughter. As we start the video this morning, we're about halfway through the build, and I've asked my dad to come help me finish it. This table is being built out of a tree that I cut down myself, milled on my own sawmill, finished all the lumber down into usable form. So first we'll go through some video of how we get the tree from standing tree into usable lumber, and then we'll pick it up with finish work on the table. So it all starts with choosing a tree to cut down. And I'm usually looking for a tree that I think will have a solid trunk, but has some damage or is coming towards the end of its life. Because these trees are a crop, and if we don't harvest them, then it's going to rot out while it stands and become a hazard, and that natural resource is going to waste. So once you've got the tree down and you've got a solid log, you've got to get it onto the mill. I really admire the people who manage to do this without equipment. If you don't have a tractor or a skid steer or an excavator and you're still milling these big logs, I take my hat off to you. So then you get it on the sawmill and you get it sliced into lumber. And you need to slice it into pieces that are thicker than what you're going to end up wanting to produce. Because once it's cut, it's got to be dried. And this lumber takes between 6 months and a year and a half to dry. It has to be stacked properly with spacing in between it. And you really want to keep it out of direct sunlight if possible. And then just wait. And even with all that, it's most likely going to be warped. This is lumber that I thought I did everything right with when I was drying it, and you can see the bow. Now I've done a couple of dedicated videos on how to straighten lumber or how to still make use of lumber that has a bow in it, or cup, or warp. You see me putting it through a planer, and I used to think that planing lumber would make it flat. That's really not what a planer does. A planer makes lumber a uniform thickness, but it can be a uniform thickness and still be bowed. I'll put links at the end of the video if you want to check out my videos on how to straighten warped lumber. The two main methods are either using a jointer like you see here, or attaching your lumber to a flattened sled and then running it through the planer. And it all just depends on the equipment that you have available to you. So everything we've covered to this point is just about getting boards that are straight enough to use. Once you have straight lumber, you've got to start putting together a tabletop. Now what you see right now is video of the last table that I built, and I used a little bit different method for building it. I used pocket holes to attach all of the boards, and then I built a skirt around it to attach some store-bought legs. But in today's video and the table we're building today, I'm making my own legs, and I'm using a little bit different method instead of that skirt. Here's the tabletop fully assembled, and there's a lot of different ways to attach these boards. The last one I did was all pocket holes here. You can clamp and glue. There's a lot of different methods. But what I decided to do was this frame right here. And I got it from the idea that sometimes you see a skirt under a table where you've got a thin board like this on edge. And that gives rigidity to the tabletop beyond what other method you use to fasten it. And I decided to basically do the same thing here, and I think this is going to be strong, and it was very simple. These pieces right here are the fall off from edging the actual top boards on the table. Here's our tabletop, about 90% finished, and as you can see, it has a lot of imperfections. The seams don't meet up perfectly height-wise. There are some gaps in places, And that was intentional. I was asked to make a rustic farmhouse table. And I had my daughter over here as I was working and asking her, do you want this to be smoothed out where it's completely flat? Do you want me to use the board with the knot or without? And she wanted this type of a finished look on it.
The rustic is very popular right now, and personally I like it. I've seen in the past they would use perfectly clear boards with no knots, no cracks, no nothing, and it almost looks fake, like plastic laminates.
So my daughter wanted live edge all the way around, which has one little bit of a challenge to it, which this live edge will have to be cleaned up a little bit before the finishing is done on it. But we've got live edge almost all the way around. But right here on the end, you have a cut piece. And so I looked at some different options of how to make this, and we could have done it in different ways. But what I'm going to do is try to create a fake live edge here by just making rough cuts into this in kind of a haphazard pattern, and hopefully we can make it look like that live edge goes all the way around. I was asked to make X-shaped legs on this table, so we're going to make two 4x4 X's with like a 2x6 probably running between those to tie them together. And the first thing you've got to do is figure out the cuts, the length of your X's. And I don't want it to be the fake X's where you have one board here, then the other pieces are cut in half on each side and attached. I want them to actually be full-length boards that are notched into each other. So the first thing we've got is some 4x4s, and we're going to cut a 45-degree angle on one side. And then from there, I struggled a little bit with how to figure out the length of each of those boards, but I'll show you what we've come up with. So we want these legs to be about 32 inches tall. We've cut a 45 on this side, and I've drawn a 32-inch square on the concrete here, and I've set the corner of this cut right in the corner of that square. And now we'll make a mark right here, and we'll cut another 45 here, and that'll give us legs that are basically 32 by 32. So for this plan to work, it puts the inside corner right here inside the box and the outside sticking out. If you were cutting two 45s here, you would have a 32 by 32 set of legs, but obviously we're not actually doing that. So this leg set will be 32 tall and about 36, 35 wide. What do you got there?
Well, we just did some sample trims, setting the height of the miter saw to only cut so deep and notch these out. And that gives you a pretty solid joint right there.
And so now the only thing we have to determine is the exact measurement, and that should be on this, if this is our leg, it should be exactly halfway, and then set the center of the other board at the halfway point. So from point to point, this is 45 inches. The center of that is 22.5. We've made our mark at 22.5. And these are 3.5. So we're going to go 1 3/4 on each side of that mark, and we'll have a gap of 3.5. Beautiful.
I think so. That ain't going nowhere. I think it's going to be strong, and I think it's going to look nice.
So these joints are so tight that we were trying to hammer them together with a rubber mallet, and that wouldn't work. So I had to get a big sledgehammer and put a piece of wood on top of it as a hammering block. Those things are in there tight. I was originally thinking I might put a carriage bolt through here to hold them together this way, but it seems really unnecessary. Especially since we were looking at different ways to attach the legs to the table. And I think you also want some kind of a stabilizer if possible. And so what we came up with is we're going to attach a stabilizer across the top so it attaches to a flat surface and is out of sight. And then we can run screws through that stabilizer into the tabletop.
The thing is, we hand fit each and every one of these joints for width, because this is rough sawed lumber, and some will dry and shrink more than others. So we've got everything from 3 1/8 here up to over 3 1/4.
So what we've come up with here to tie these together to stabilize everything is these are 2x4 and 2x6 boards, so that they come up the same distance on each side. It's going to give it a lot of strength. It's still pretty rough, but before actually attaching all of these, we're going to sand all the parts individually. We want it to be rough, but not like get a splinter rough. Then we're going to put 1-bys across here and screw those down. And then that'll give us 2 pieces so that it's easier to take in and out of a house. Before actually attaching this to the tabletop, we'll take it on location, set this in the house, then screw it, set the tabletop on, and then run the screws in. But that should give it a lot of stability right there. We want this stuff pretty rough, but not quite this rough. So the first thing I'm doing is using a flap disc to take these corners and just put a real soft bevel on them. And then we're going to hit it with a 60 grit sandpaper. And we probably won't work up much from there. I got some 180 grit, but I don't think we want it 180 grit smooth. So all the sanding is done. We've replicated the live edge that you see here by sanding this down into a similar kind of shape. And we're going to use mineral spirits to wipe this down to remove any dust before applying the finish. As soon as you start doing this, you can see the way that color is going to pop. And that's some beautiful grain right there. We're using a water-based polyurethane. They wanted a clear finish, so that's what we're getting. This stuff goes on white but dries clear. If you leave this for 24 hours, you have to sand it before the next coat, and they recommend a minimum of 3 coats. But if we only wait an hour to 2 hours and then check it and it feels dry, then you can go ahead and put on another coat. So I'm going to try to get 3 or maybe 4 coats on tonight so I don't have to do any sanding. And then all we have to do is attach this to the legs. I am pretty happy with the way the table looks, and it is absolutely rock solid. I think it's going to last a long time, and it's something I can be proud of, especially the fact that I took it from a standing tree to a finished, usable piece of furniture. I take a lot of enjoyment out of that, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. So I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.